the issue that there's been significant debate about, and if you're not the person to answer it, feel free just to say so. The issue of ministerial involvement in these works, and there's been media reports that it involved ministerial sign-off. What's your understanding of the link between the Minister of State of today and the OPW and the department in carrying out these offices? I mean, there has been correspondence, email correspondence in national newspapers saying that ex-official or ex-individual in a ministerial office, I'm using my words here, but signed off on, approved. Would that be your understanding of what happens, or would that not be the case?
I can definitively say from the Office of Public Works point of view, we had no contact with the Minister in question on this job. But any contact that would have been with the department, and I'm not privy, all our interactions would have been with the department.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other colleagues want to come in? Deputy McGuinness.
I do, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
That's okay.
Sure, absolutely.
I'm sure that doesn't surprise you. I firstly want to welcome the exchange here this morning. I think that it has been quite informative from toilet rolls to refurbishment, and it'll help, I hope, those outside of the debate to understand just what went on in relation to this particular project. I feel that I can ask some questions in relation to this because we're now dealing with the OPW and not the department, so I can feel free to ask those questions. And I firstly want to place on public record the fact that the OPW have responded to me and have informed me that at no stage, through either written correspondence or meetings, telephone calls or emails, did I have anything whatsoever to do with this particular project. The OPW and the accounting officer is here with us, took full responsibility for the project itself. So my questions are really simple enough in a way, because I didn't have an involvement in it, but I'm curious about the process and how you get there in terms of spending that kind of money. You had an email request on the 5th of July 2007 in relation to the provision of this office. Who was that from in terms of enterprise, trade and employment?
I would have to look at the
but it was an email. You confirm in your letter that it was by telephone call first and then by email.
Yes.
So that letter came on the 5th, or that email came on the 5th of July, and the telephone request I think came sometime around the same time. And the date was the 5th of July. The brief was prepared, as I understand it, in line with civil service norms. You say that in your letter also. So it wasn't something that was concocted out of the blue. It was something that is, in terms of the planning, it's there in terms of civil service norms. So what you're saying in that particular comment, I think, is that ministers' offices generally are the same, that there is a norm for them, that junior ministers likewise, and apparently it goes down to secretary, assistant secretary, and whatever levels underneath that, so that most of the offices are constructed in terms of square footage and accommodation in exactly the same way. Would that be correct?
Yes, that would be fair.
There was no space in terms of this building and relevant to that standard of ministerial space available, so it was a new construct. In terms of the cost, because I think that's critical, I have to say I worked in that office. If you told me on the day I entered the office that it cost that much money, I certainly wouldn't have believed you. If I had known now what or then what I know now, I'd have probably added a further chapter to my book, just to compile it all and make it an easy reference for people. But I didn't. So in terms of the cost, your only comparison then, by way of the tenders that you received, was to compare it to this Bruce Shaw handbook. Is that correct? Where it sets out costs and other aspects of it.
The final confirmation in relation to the decision to proceed on this project would have regard to, is it within norms?
But the Bruce Shaw handbook, is that some book of costs that you can make a reasonable comparison?
Yes.
So in making that reasonable, or in making that comparison with this Bruce Shaw handbook, did someone in your organisation decide, yes, this is value for money? Was that?
Yes, I mean, no project would proceed unless you have regard to the value.
So that was the test.
price.
That was the test of the brief and the test of the tender process.
And it was the test of the tender. It's there reflected in the tender.
How many
assessment.
tendered for the job?
I think in the order of 5. One may have withdrawn, but 5.
So you had 5 tenders, 1 withdrawn.
Yeah.
You had 4 tenders left.
Yeah.
And you opted presumably for the lowest tender, and then compared it to this Bruce Shaw handbook.
Yes.
And then that gave you your decision that it was within the norm of industry standards at that time and gave you value for money.
Well,
Is that right?
that enabled us to say we can continue now to proceed to do the work.
Okay. What happens then? Because it is a considerable amount of money to spend. So where does the authority come from within the OPW to spend that money? What is the next step after someone carries out the analysis, looks at the lowest tender and decides, yes, this is within the guidelines? Who then signs off on this? Where does it go to from there?
A report is prepared, and this is it goes through stages of submission and authorisation to the level, usually I would say at principal officer level within the office.
So a principal officer can sign off on the project, or did sign off on the project.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And that person would have the authority to do that.
Yes.
And then the work proceeds.
Yes.
Okay. In your correspondence, because that's a higher executive officer is involved in this as well, I understand from your correspondence. So that higher executive officer submitted a request to accept the lowest tender. And he submitted that request to whom?
An assistant principal.
An assistant principal officer.
Yeah.
So it went from higher executive officer to assistant principal officer.
Yes.
Did it require ministerial approval, either on one side of the department or on the other side of the department?
No.
No, none at all.
No.
Okay. The dates then, because I want to go back to this date of the 5th of July. The 5th of July, a message was sent to the OPW, standard format, that a decision had been taken by the other department that this office was required. And then it went from there within that department to planning and all that on the various stages. If I could just say to you that prior to the 11th of July, notice was given that the office was for 5 civil servants and various survey drawings were submitted. I simply want to place this on record, Mr. Chairman. If I can, it arises from correspondence that's in the public domain. And at the 11th of July, plans at that stage had not been finalised and were being described as draft in various emails that I have seen. It was suggested then, and I have to address this because I was the junior minister in question. It was suggested then that I generally agree these plans on the 13th of July. And in those plans there was no offices provided for civil servants at that time. In other words, the plans were still draft, there were works in progress, it wasn't the final draft. I think it may have been referred to by Deputy Harris. In fact, on the 16th of July, architects confirmed that they were still developing the plans and options. So therefore, to suggest that these were final plans is simply not correct. Because these plans were reproduced in a daily newspaper, and I have to say that they were not the plans that I had seen. And as I say again, the 18th of July, the project drawings were described as working projects. The 27th of July, the project went to tender. There was no reference whatsoever to the Minister in relation to this matter. It was not my job to sign off on those plans. I'm not an architect, an engineer, or a clerk of works, and therefore not qualified to sign off. It was done elsewhere in the department, and as was the case in relation to the tendering process, it could have been stopped at any stage when the tender documents were returned with the price, if that price were found to be excessive by the OPW, and that didn't happen either. And the minutes of the various meetings, which are available, show no involvement whatsoever by me, none. I'm saying this because this committee here is the committee of audit, public accountability. I take my role seriously in this, and I would leave no stone unturned to do my job professionally and do it well. And this has caused me some concern, which I have not been able to address up to now in the way that I would like. I think that your letter of the 16th of May clearly demonstrates that this project was managed, delivered by the OPW out of a fund arranged, or out of funding from the OPW itself. In relation to the OPW at that time, they were part of the Department of Finance, is that right?
Yes, we're an office within the...
Yeah. Is it fair to say that you're almost an independent department in there? You are the accounting officer.
Yes. We are, in that sense, independent in relation to the functions, yeah, the exercise.
And at that stage, you'd have your own line minister.
Yes.
But you're subject to the Department of Finance in there, just to get this right. In other words, you're within the Department of Finance, you're your own independent accounting officer in that regard, and you had your own line minister. So at that time, you were within the remit of the Department of Finance. You're now coming under public expenditure and reform. Is that correct?
I think your use of the word subject, if you have a particular view of what that may...
No, I'm just trying to I'm asking you how that department, in terms of finance, was structured at that time.
We have the estimates process. Our allocation is annual, as every other line department. We are given an allocation and we operate within that through the estimates process. And
you have your own line minister.
Yes.
I'm talking at this time.
Yes.
Because you weren't, you were termed Department of Finance. The OPW was within that department.
Yeah. Not dissimilar to the Revenue Commissioners.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So therefore, at any stage, the line minister or someone senior in this department could have said yes or no to this project, depending on the outcome of the tender. You had the authority to accept the tender or to reject the tender. Is that right?
Yes.
You're now with what department then? You've moved recently?
Public Expenditure and Reform.
So Mr. Watt would be the accounting officer with Public Expenditure and Reform.
He wouldn't be the accounting officer for the Office of Public Works.
No, that's what I'm saying. He's Public Expenditure and Reform, and you are the accounting officer for the OPW still.
Yes.
Okay. To touch on one of the, I suppose, the lighter accounts in this, the use of toilet rolls. Do you purchase toilet rolls?
We purchase janitorial supplies, yes.
Toilet rolls?
Yes.
Yeah. And would you supply those toilet rolls to every department?
Sorry, I don't supply anything to anyone. The actual provider of the contract supplies.
I'm not trying to pin this on you.
Yeah.
I'm just interested because I've never seen a paper to get so many column inches out of a toilet roll story. But anyway, so they're purchased, the framework is there by which other departments can purchase at a particular...
Contract in place from which they then draw down.
Who's that contract with?
We think it may have been Boylan's at that time, but we can
Boylan's.
revert. Yeah.
Okay. How much is that contract worth?
I think it's in the order of the 2 million in 2011.
Now, we better clarify this. These are not for my use, this 2 million. This is for the use right across the government.
Yes,
departments.
this is the benefit of the National Procurement Service, that we
So
can leverage.
you get value for money out of it.
Yes, leverage economies of scale to drive better prices for items.
So the contract with Boylan's, is that right?
Yeah, I will correct that if that's wrong, but I understand that's who the supplier
Was
at the
worth
time.
how much?
2.1 million.
2.1 million. And that would have covered janitorial supplies.
Yes.
Generally.
Yeah.
Within that contract, do you specify particular grades of toilet roll?
Sorry, we don't. I have to get out the terms of the
Will
contract.
it be the same grade for everybody?
Yes.
It would. So it's the same grade of
Sorry,
toilet roll?
what might distinguish it is whether it's a kind of like a very substantial supply, single rolls. There's different various.
But it's the same. It's the
yes.
same quality for everybody.
Yes.
Now, people would be interested in this because of the level of interest created out of the articles. So it's the same level of the same standard of our quality right across government.
There's one contract.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. That's fine. And in relation to the emails that were referred to in the public media, these were emails really reflecting on not the minister's request for a particular toilet roll, but for the system that was in place, that was in use or whatever at the time. So that, I think that more or less clarifies that. I don't think there's any other matter, Chairman, that I have to ask about. I do want to maybe just make reference, if I can, to a question raised by Deputy Murphy. I think raised this question. He was wondering, in this particular instance, I'm trying to help the committee here, where was I from July to August, and was there other accommodation provided? Again, if I can refer to the emails which weren't touched on by the media, it said that he was in this room at the end of the corridor using borrowed furniture. In fact, I supplied some of the furniture. But the point is that there was no funding or funds spent on other alternative accommodation during that period of time. I think that's the critical question here. And that the office then was available from, I think it was September. I think that's as much as I would like to ask.
Okay, does any other member